Okay, we're back, we're live, we're here in the state of clean energy, even on a Monday. But you know why? Because every day we're in the state of clean energy. And I'm going to talk about island circuits today with Marco Mangelsdorf, who joins us by Skype from, I guess it's from Kona now, in his company, which is Provision Solar there. Hi, Marco. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, Jay, it is such a great pleasure, as always, to be back with you. And just a small correction, I'm still in what I call the People's Republic of Santa Cruz, California, where I'm finishing up the quarter at the University of California, Santa Cruz.
Can we take a moment and ask you how it's going in Santa Cruz? You've been there for a few months. You want to teach what you teach in the University of Hawaii in Hilo, the same subject, I guess, politics and energy. What's it like there? It must be, different, no?
Well, one of the principal changes or differences is that I must necessarily spend part of the beginning of the quarter focusing not on Hawaii energy politics, but on California energy politics, because I'm teaching at a California university.
Fair
so
enough.
That's the principal difference, and it is a qualitative change to some extent in terms of the makeup of the students and the overall environment, and it's just great to be able to kind of see and experience an academic environment that's different from the one I've known these past years at the University of Hawaii Hilo. So I enjoy them both.
Yeah, I want to press in on the one at Santa Cruz. I mean, do you find the students sophisticated more or less than Hawaii on matters of energy and renewable energy and for that matter, the politics around energy? I mean, are they reading, thinking, having visions about these subjects?
Well, one of the main, I think, differentiating factors is that typically the University of California system has been designed from the get-go to accept essentially the top 8-10% of California high school graduates. So the competition to get into a UC is typically going to be greater than to get into a University of Hawaii campus. So I found, for the most part, a higher level of interest and, shall I say, sophistication on the part of UC students. They seem to be more aware, more interested in following the world around them, at least as far as energy issues and energy politics go. And just to kind of clue you in on one of the bigger issues here in California as of late, you've probably heard of fracking, which has become big news over the past several years, especially in places such as North Dakota, Oklahoma, Texas, and there is supposedly the largest natural gas and oil shale formation in the U.S., known as the Monterey Formation, and it is estimated to have 4 or 5 times the quantity of oil that the Bakken Formation has up in the North Dakota, Canada area. So it would truly be something of a game changer on multiple levels if the decision was made by Governor Jerry Brown, who's doing his second stint now as governor of the state of California, if he were to go full speed ahead as far as authorizing an aggressive policy of fracking the Monterey oil formation. And he's yet to do that, and he's being urged by a lot of the environmental organizations, to essentially do a moratorium, implement a moratorium saying no fracking whatsoever. So it's a very, very political issue here that has environmentalists and energy folks and the common folk as well very engaged, with the county of Santa Cruz voting not too long ago to ban fracking within county limits, which of course is kind of more of a feel-good decision than a practical one, because there's been no proposal to do frack in Santa Cruz, and our friends in the city of Beverly Hills also voted to ban fracking, but again, very little likelihood that there's going to be any energy companies are going to want to frack in under Beverly Hills. So it's been quite enjoyable to kind of turn my focus away from Hawaii energy politics to California.
Well, what does it teach us, the fracking issue, as opposed to renewables? for Hawaii. To me, I think one major issue coming down the pike, and I actually think it's closer than it seems to be. It's like when you look in the mirror of your car and it says objects in this mirror are closer than they really are, or something. I think LNG is closer than it seems to be. I think one day, in the coming few years, or months, it's going to be with us, and we're going to have lots of money spent on it. We're going to have cheaper prices by it. We're not going to have a lot of public conversation about it. It'll just happen. So what do we learn? What can we learn from, the events in California, Santa Cruz, fracking there, in terms of dealing with the LNG issue that's coming down the pike here?
There are at least a couple of perspectives on that, Jay, and I think it's a very juicy question. It's been proposed that with the greater amounts, the greater abundance of natural gas across the U.S. mainland at cheaper costs than they have been for years, that and LNG and nat gas is a cleaner burning fuel than burning oil in a power plant. It's a cleaner burning fuel than burning coal, certainly, in a power plant, and that the greater use of natural gas across the U.S. mainland and bringing it into the Hawaiian Islands could serve as something as a bridge fuel from the dirtier forms of energy in our portfolio right now to a more robust renewable energy future. But then on the other side of that debate, you have people who I respect, such as Jeff Michelina with the Blue Planet Foundation and others in Hawaii, who, if I'm not mistaken, are quite opposed to bringing in lots of LNG into Hawaii.
Sierra Club and Blue Planet, both.
So I guess it's kind of a mixed mind. I mean, we know that Hawaii is and has been far too dependent on imported fossil fuels to power its economy, and it's unlikely that there's going to be some type of transformative fix, especially for the transportation sector in Hawaii. That's really a very difficult nut to crack, as I've been teaching these past several years. Producing electricity from solar, from wind, from geothermal, from burning waste, I mean, that's a lot more straightforward and doable, comparatively speaking, to shifting our transportation fuel needs to something other than petroleum. So if we could somehow use nat gas to use in fuel cells for locomotion for vehicles, which I'll just share with you. I read a piece in the San Francisco Chronicle just in the past few days that announced that automakers such as Hyundai and Toyota are doubling down on fuel cells, while they both seem to be taking a step away from electric vehicles in terms of electric vehicles that are charged by batteries. So there was an image of a bunch of Hyundai SUVs coming off the boat here, and those here in California, and those are going to run on hydrogen. So one can use nat gas as a basis to get hydrogen. So if somehow we could use nat gas in greater quantities in Hawaii and use it to produce hydrogen, that's pretty exciting. But that, of course, is going to take quite a bit of money and infrastructure changes that are going to take time.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that's the bet. It doesn't matter where the energy comes from. What matters, you want to get a good source and a cheap source, but any source, if you had the technology to convert it into hydrogen, would be a good source. And then you can put it in tanks, and you can ship it anywhere in the world. So you have a world market in hydrogen tanks. And big tanks can be developed. And cars certainly can use hydrogen and fuel cell technology, which ultimately runs a battery, and you get the best of all worlds. And I think that's actually coming soon, but for some reason, the technology hasn't really, surfaced yet.
Well, I'll share this with you, Jay, and I think it's a rather interesting illustrative story. Back in 2004, then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, who succeeded poor old Gray Davis, after Gray Davis was unceremoniously deposed in a recall election for doing nothing wrong, by the way, except being kind of a doofus when it came to some of his political decisions. But nonetheless, he got on the bad side of California voters, and he was thrown out, and Governor Schwarzenegger, or Arnold Schwarzenegger, became governor. And one of Schwarzenegger's signature efforts in terms of clean energy was to vow that he was going to create a hydrogen infrastructure up and down California, and that this was back in 2004. He vowed that there would be 200 or more hydrogen fueling stations north and south, east and west in California. And now we're 10 years later, and you want to take a guess about how many fueling stations there are in California in terms of being able to pull your car up with a fuel cell powertrain and get your tank filled with hydrogen? Want to take a guess?
One.
No, that's a little bit too conservative. There were nine.
Nine
total in the state of California. Three in the Bay Area, one in and around Sacramento, and 5 or so down in the LA area. So even after someone with as much gusto and larger-than-life presence as Mr. Schwarzenegger vowed 10 years ago that he was going to make it a signature piece in his administration, it all, kind of fizzled out and didn't come to much. So,
well, you have to link it. You have to link the hydrogen fueling station with the hydrogen vehicles, and there are a very precious few of them even now. I mean, I think most of them, in fact, all of them that are actually on the market type vehicles, maybe they're still experimental there too, is in the military. And maybe some buses for some municipalities, but it's not a lot of vehicles. So if you want to build the stations, you got to build the vehicles.
And in order to build the vehicles, you got to have the stations. I mean, purely as a chicken and egg in terms of what good is it having a fuel cell powered, hydrogen powered vehicle if you don't have the infrastructure to be able to fuel up? And why put together an infrastructure that's going to cost a substantial amount of money if you don't have the hydrogen based consuming vehicles that are going to use your product?
Well, so a couple of years ago, the Energy Policy Forum put a program together which sounded in transportation, and which asked a million questions about things that had not happened. And we're actually doing that again, this time in July 22nd at Laniakea. We're doing a program called What Hasn't Happened. And one of the things that hasn't happened, one large thing that hasn't happened, is transportation. I mean, there's really nothing going on. And, you can look at the ads on television. God, sit there and watch whatever you watch now on cable. You get 27 car ads, and all the car ads are all for fossil fuel cars. And people buy them, and then they populate all the roads, and we don't make any progress at all about it.
Right.
By the way, they're calling you to participate in that program. I hope you can make it.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to.
Yeah. So, transportation, big problem, but I think the answer is probably, conceptually simple. It's hydrogen, somehow.
Well, if you are lucky, and I'm not sure how many there are going to be next month or 2 months or 3 months from now, but Hyundai is now making their hydrogen fuel cell SUV available for lease. So it is interesting that the big automakers are not going to be selling them outright, at least initially. They're going to be leasing them, which means, of course, that they retain ownership of the vehicle, just like General Motors did of their EV back years ago, and caused people to literally break down in tears when GM said, okay, the lease is over, you have to give back your vehicles. And these people who had grown very attached to their electric vehicles were incredibly despondent with the thought that GM was going to take those vehicles and put them in the masher, which is exactly what they did. Hence
I remember
the film of a number of years ago, Who Killed the Electric Car.
Yes,
so
yes.
It's not going to make a big difference anytime soon, but I think it is one way that the state is going to be able to reduce its need for liquid petroleum fuels for transportation. But then you got an amazingly large chunk of that transportation fuel requirement going to fuel inter-island air traffic, both for people and for cargo. And as far as I know, I've never heard of any fuel cells that are going to be powering aircraft. I mean,
No.
the best we can do, what Richard Branson has been doing with his Virgin Atlantic, Virgin America fleets, he's been running his aircraft on a bio mix with substantial percentage of petroleum-based fuel along with a biomass-based fuel. So I don't know if Hawaiian or Aloha Cargo or any of the main carriers, are thinking about doing that or not.
Good for him. And I remember going to see I guess it was on the Grove Farms property in Kauai. They had a farm there that was growing algae with a view toward making jet fuel. The next time I looked, it was closed. I don't think algae is going to make jet fuel anytime soon. It was all this talk, but it isn't happening. So I think planes are somewhere in the distant future. Cars for now. And your point about the neighbor islands is really an interesting point, because it puts into even greater relief the lack of a ferry. If there was a ferry, a commercial ferry, such as Super Ferry, just like that actually, could deliver goods. Contractors could work multiple islands without having to pay airfare for everything, or barge, and it could run on things other than fossil fuel. Could be electric, could be biofuel, any number of possibilities, and it could withstand the problem of fossil fuel and the expense and all that. So it would be a kind of hedge on the fossil fuel problem and the transportation problem and the aircraft fuel problem to have an inter-island ferry. But if you hadn't noticed, nobody in government is making the slightest effort to actually recreate an inter-island ferry of any kind.
Well, given the previous governor's experiences with her super ferry, it's kind of perhaps understandable that there's not the political oomph and motivation to revisit that.
That's a course I might want to teach. Politics and ferries. Anyway, let's take a really short break and come back and get serious here with China. Let's talk about the tariffs, about China and Taiwan. Talk about what they're doing, how they're dealing with the energy problem, how they're trying to corner the market, if at all. So this is the State of Clean Energy here on a Monday with Marco Mangelsdorf. We're talking about island circuits today, and we'll be right back after this very short break.
It's Willow Chang Leon, and I host a show called The Art of Life. We air live every Friday from 2 to 3 p.m. And what we do is basically we focus on individuals who create a unique sense of place for Hawaii. These are movers and shakers, artists, innovators. They are also traditionalists. They're all involved in the archival process, and they make this place a unique place, one that makes Hawaii a richer place to be. I hope you do join us, and certainly tell your friends about the show, whether they live here or they live abroad. It's a way to give back to our community. We're keeping it pumping.
Okay, we're back. We're live. This is Think Tech Talks. I'm Jay Fidel. It's the State of Clean Energy today. We're talking about island circuits, if you like, with Marco Mangelsdorf, who joins us not from Hilo, but from Santa Cruz in California, where he's teaching a course in politics and energy, which I'd really love to attend. I'd like to pop up in your class one day, if you'll let me.
You're always welcome, Dave.
Anyway, China. China's the big word today. We've had a couple of China shows already, and we should talk some more about China and energy. How are they doing in the renewables department?
The Chinese central government in Beijing and the provincial governments, many of them, have pretty significantly increased their commitments, at least on paper, to more renewable energy for the People's Republic of China, given the fact that the appetite for energy in China has been growing by leaps and bounds, and by 2020, according to party leader and President Xi Jinping, the expected increase in the demand for energy resources is expected to as much as double in the next 6 or 7 years in China, which is truly mind-boggling, because if you look at a graph of China energy consumption over the past 20 or so years, the increase of their consumption of energy resources across the board has already been almost kind of J-curve like, and with the leadership saying that they're expecting that to double, truly is going, to use Star Trekkian terms, where no man has gone before, and giving a lot of folks who are aware of the Chinese energy consumption real concern, based on the fact that China is and will continue for quite a while to be substantially dependent on burning coal, which is one of the worst greenhouse gas emitters in terms of fossil fuel substances on the planet. So their ambitions to continue to grow their economy at a clip of 7-8% per year will continue to demand more and more energy resources. And while their commitment to renewables is substantial and growing, especially in the form of solar and wind, it's hard to see that solar and or wind is going to make that much of a difference, or be that large a percentage, at least in the near term, in terms of the overall Chinese energy pie. They are trying to cut back on their increase in consumption of coal. They are committing to doubling down on the nuclear option. Interestingly, despite what happened to a not so far distant neighbor, Japan, I'm referring to, in Fukushima in 2011. So they're kind of taking Obama's all of the above strategy of we need to develop everything as fast as we can, while paying perhaps a bit more lip service to renewables. But in the short term, in the near term, midterm, it's just unlikely that renewable energies in China is going to make that much of a difference. And there are a number of infrastructure challenges there that are truly big, such as the fact that wind resources in China are typically substantial distances from major population centers, such as Inner Mongolia, and moving more towards the west in mainland China. And then you have solar resources, which, if you look at a solar map of China, you will see that the best solar resources are on the Tibetan Plateau and in the Xinjiang autonomous region, which is where there has been a fair amount of news coming out of that region lately because of various terrorist attacks ascribed to Uyghurs, to Muslims there. So the takeaway being is that the best solar resources and the best wind resources are at substantial distances away from major population centers. So you've got grid transmission lack thereof challenges, and not also trivial, the state grid companies there, and there are only a handful of them, as in 5 or so, at least traditionally, they have not been all that friendly towards renewable energy. So if you have a utility or utilities of the grid, which you require to be able to get your product to market, and the infrastructure is not there to be able to do so in an efficient manner, and second, you've got the operators of the grid who are not all that friendly traditionally towards renewable energy, then it makes the plans and the policies coming from Beijing and from the provincial governments, it makes them even that much more of a challenge.
Well, I think they recognize more than we do that the future of the economy of the world is in energy, as well as water and food. But you can't grow an economy without having adequate energy. And I think they made their minds up about this a few years ago. I remember we had an exchange Chinese lawyer in the exchange lawyer system here back, say, 4 or 5 years ago. And she was all eyes about energy in Hawaii. It's almost she wanted to gather every piece of information she could find about what was going on in renewable energy. And this was at a time before they were doing much in developing, their own technology for the manufacture of PV panels. And they took to that. I mean, they really jumped on that issue. And how long has it been? It's only been, 4 or 5 years, and now they're the world leader in that. Exporting like crazy, and I grant you, the big PV installations are far away from the cities, but I'm sure there's lots of PV elsewhere, maybe on rooftops in China, and they're trying to at least do that along with all the others. But I think they recognize, and we should recognize too, that at the end of the day, the country with adequate and cheap energy is the one that has a better economy, and the country without it, it has a worse economy, and they're paying attention to that.
Well, just to kind of bring everybody up to speed in terms of where we are at now, last year in 2013, if you look at the top 10 photovoltaic manufacturers of the world in terms of volume, 9 out of those top 10 were Chinese, either mainland Chinese or Taiwanese, with only one of the top 10 being other than Chinese, which is a company, U.S.-based, called First Solar. So clearly they have become the dominant player in the market, and any day now this week, we collectively in the industry are expecting that the U.S. Department of Commerce will announce their decision in terms of whether they find in favor of Solar World, which is a German-based photovoltaic manufacturer that has a facility in Oregon as well, whether they find in agreement with Solar World in favor of Solar World's complaint that Chinese PV manufacturers have been continuing to gain the system and are unfairly competing with other manufacturers. So Commerce will announce whether they are imposing additional tariffs on Chinese solar modules that have parts or materials in the solar modules that are either produced in mainland China or Taiwan. So if in fact they find that the Taiwanese and the mainland Chinese have been working together to try to unfairly compete and sell below cost, then Commerce will issue the first round of known as countervailing duty tariffs on equipment coming from mainland China and from Taiwan. And the Taiwan aspect of the decision is something new. In other words, 2 years ago when Commerce found in favor of Solar World's complaint, it only focused on solar equipment coming from mainland China. So this time Solar World said, hey, well, we think the Taiwanese are also in cahoots essentially with the mainland Chinese, and we want to put a stop to that. So we'll find out within days. Supposedly the Commerce will announce that decision, and if they find what are known as critical circumstances, which is a specific term that they use, that if they find critical circumstances, then they can go back 90 days retroactive to the day of the announcement of their decision. In other words, cast the net back 3 months to any such equipment that came into the U.S. from China or from Taiwan.
And tax it retroactively. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's
exactly.
what happened to you. Didn't that happen to you?
Yes, dear Jay. I'm well familiar with how that game plays out, and I have not purchased any Chinese modules since. Just to let you know.
Yeah, but all of that, all of that customs and tariff and whatnot business, To me, I don't think it's going to change the basic progression here. And the progression is that the U.S. is not manufacturing, not for the long haul. We're not going to be manufacturing these cells. We can't compete, tariff or otherwise. And at the end of the day, the Chinese are going to be making them all, which is really very tragic. Because the right solution to this is to somehow incentivize the manufacture of PV in this country and make this country a leader in manufacturing PV. And it's what we should do. Instead, it's going the wrong way. This all sounds so negative. And at the end of the day, too, I think the Chinese will control it. And so we'll be dependent on them for probably our favorite form of renewable energy. And we'll have to buy it from them because there won't be anything else that we can buy it from. And they will have control of that. And if they don't want to sell it to us one day, we won't have any replacement PV panels. The other thing that strikes me, and you would know a lot more about this, is how do we know how good a panel is? How do we know that a given panel, however it's rated, so to speak, is really going to last its warranted life or its projected expected life? If I tell you that my panel is going to last 30 years, why should you rely on that? Maybe it's really going to last 10 years or whatever. And I'm thinking that we could be awash with panels from China that we think are going to last 30 years and only last 10 years. At the end of 10 years, you can't find a replacement from an American manufacturer, have to go back to China, and China has us on a long string on into the future because we become dependent not on oil, but on PV and PV from China. I mean, does this give you the same kind of cold feeling that I have?
Well, it's an excellent point that you make, Jay, and let me address it this way. It takes a certain level of sophistication that is typically going to be far beyond the average homeowner or business owner who's considering buying a photovoltaic system. That level of sophistication to be able to make an informed enough decision that company A versus company B in terms of photovoltaic manufacturers, that one is using superior materials, superior design, superior quality controls. It's going to involve a level of effort and scrutiny that the vast majority of consumers of photovoltaic equipment are certainly not going to get into. They're going to rely on the salesperson telling them, hey, you are buying a good product, it's going to last a long time, don't worry about it. And to me, another kind of a corollary but also a very important question in that equation in terms of, well, how long is this stuff going to last? Certainly you can question whether, well, is it more likely to last longer if it's from China versus whether it's made in the Czech Republic or whether it's assembled in Taiwan or in Oregon or in Texas or in Italy. But I would say just as important a question to address is that manufacturer likely to be around in the years to come to take care of any quality control or failure issues? And I can give you an excellent case in point in that for a number of years in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the number one photovoltaic manufacturer on the planet was a company by the name of BP Solar. BP as in British Petroleum, although they now refer themselves as Beyond Petroleum. BP is one of the largest companies on the face of the planet in terms of gross revenue. They're definitely in the top 10 worldwide. And they were sitting astride the top of the PV world for a number of years. And for, in my opinion, a number of poor business decisions over time and kind of a rotating door at the CEO level, they went from being number one to number two to number five, and they dropped off the map. And, what was it, 5-6 years ago, they got out entirely. BP decided to completely pull the plug on their photovoltaic operations. Why? Well, they simply weren't making the type of return that they wanted to make, and they cut their losses and they got out. So you would think that a big company that was number one in the world, backed by one of the largest corporations on the planet, with all this money, all this resources, that they would be committed to putting out a very high quality product. Well, they were. They were committed to doing that, but that didn't stop a design flaw from being rather rampant in BP solar modules that those of us who installed them back in the day are dealing with on at least a semi-regular basis. Does it mean that they blew it? Does it mean that they made poor choices? Not necessarily, but stuff happens in terms of things that come up a year, 2 years, 5 years longer down the road, in terms of degradation of wire, of components, and so forth. So in this particular example, BP is making good on any and all legitimate warranty claims for their modules that have gone bad in the field. So the point I'm making is that when you've got a company such as a BP, or such as, for example, Shot Solar was a very solid product. They'd been making solar modules for 30 years until they got out of the market, the PV market, a couple years ago. They're a big German multinational, electronics and aeronautics. And they too came to a similar calculus that they just couldn't see making money in the current climate, and that wasn't likely to change, so they got out. But they are continuing to warranty whatever solar modules are out in the field. And I could say the same about SunPower as well. I think SunPower is a U.S.-based manufacturer. They have facilities in places such as Malaysia and the Philippines, and they are backed by Total, which is the 10th largest company on the planet in terms of revenue, and Total is a Paris-based energy company. So my takeaway being that those manufacturers who are either backed by or part of a large multinational company that is likely to be around for years, if not decades, I think that is the better bet for the consumer if they are purchasing a system that they want to have last a long time. Now, if you are getting a system that is through a third-party ownership option, which means that you don't own the system, that a third party does, whether it's a Vivint Solar, whether it's Sunrun, whether it's Solar City, there's less exposure, less liability to the customer, to the homeowner, because the onus is on the owner of the system to have the product work properly and last as long as the contract, because they don't make their money unless the solar modules are putting power.
Yeah, so that's going to get more popular as we go forward, right?
Right.
I mean, for the consumer and also for the coupon clip. And it also gives you, a greater stability somehow, because it's necessary to maintain in order to do the coupon clip. But, I remember going to China a couple of times ago, and one of the guys on the trip was an insurance guy. And he had concluded that in China, they didn't have a lot of warranties that were available, those secondary warranties on new cars. And they were selling a ton of cars, but only the primary warranties. And so his mission on that trip was to find out, whether it was underwritable. And I'm not sure what he ultimately decided, but it seemed to me to be a great idea. Well, likewise about photovoltaic. And I predict to you, Marco, that over the next couple of years, if that hasn't happened already, companies will grow to offer extended warranties, not the same guys as manufacturers either. Sort of third-party warranties come in and say, if your PV doesn't last for as long as it should, or you think it should, we'll fix or replace it. We'll step in. So it doesn't matter if the manufacturer left town. It doesn't matter if the installer left town. And I think we're going to have a lot of that. In fact, that's happening already here. We can talk about that next. But I think there's actually a market for these third-party warranties, and somebody's going to figure it out. Somebody's going to work out the underwriting and make some money.
I agree.
Want to go into business? Let's have another conversation afterward. So, okay, let's talk about the consolidation. We always need to do that. How is it going here? We're going into June already. How is the consolidation in the PV installation industry now?
Well, the numbers continue to be fairly grim, Jay. Just finishing up the data from our friends at the Department of Planning and Permitting, and they're in Honolulu, and for May, for the month of May, and I don't have them all tabulated yet, but it appears that the number of photovoltaic system permits for May will probably be the lowest that the island has seen in 2.5 years, and that is causing not a small amount of grief to quite a few companies on Oahu that have seen their sales drop rather precipitously. And I hear from a number of sources that the downsizing, or as one of my friends put it, right sizing of personnel is definitely happening, which means that there are people losing their jobs or having their hours cut back, and it's very hard to see any type of near-term fix to that trend stopping. The way I see things right now is the main challenge, or at least one of the main challenges that the HECO, HELCO, and MECO are facing is what to do in these circuits that are already at 120% of daytime minimum load in equivalent PV capacity on the circuit. That is where it appears the red line is more or less being drawn by the utilities, saying, we're looking for answers, we're looking for solutions to go beyond that, but right now we don't have much to offer. And the issue, as I understand, is that during the minimum demand or the minimum load times for HECO, HELCO, MECO are typically during the day between 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., which just happens to coincide with the best solar generation hours. And that is when they are having challenges in these saturated circuits with having essentially too much solar power being generated from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And what to do with it? How is it affecting that circuit stability, and how is it therefore affecting overall grid stability? So the next, I won't call it solution, because I think it's not really a solution as much as it's somewhat of a fix, or perhaps allows us to go higher collectively and more solar in these saturated circuits, is to find a way that from 10 to 2, which is their minimum load hours during the day, find a way to, instead of having solar power being generated and offsetting loads or feeding back into the grid, is to have that solar power being stored during the 10 to 2 hours, so that it is not used in any way, shape, or form during that 4-hour time period to affect HELCO, HECO, MECO's grid situation. So I see that as having some of the most promise right now in terms of the utilities being able to go beyond 120%.
Such a problem with storage, I mean, that's a great way to look at the problem, to say, we're not going to talk about overnight. We're not going to talk about it for a week. We're just talking 4 hours. Just give us storage for 4 hours. But even that very modest goal, opens all kinds of questions, like, where is the storage? Is it on the customer end? Is it on the utility end? Who pays? Well, I guess the customer pays on the customer end, but if it's on the utility end, do I have to pay? I don't have PV. I don't care, and so forth. And it resurrects the whole argument about. And the other thing is, in that 4-hour period, why don't they just curtail it? They say, we're not buying. We can't buy all the time. We're going to cut you off. We don't need it. and just take those 4 hours and ground it. I mean, to me, it's an interesting exercise to answer these questions for the 4 hours when, the next question is going to be, what do we do overnight? But so far, I don't think we've answered any of the questions, and we don't have anything online. I keep asking people, what is the smart grid, and they give me very amorphous answers. And I look at those orders and decisions from the PUC, and equally amorphous. You guys will fix this. We don't know how, but you'll fix this.
Right.
So I'm not sure we're going to solve that until we get some real storage or we just say we're not going to take it. If we can't use it, we're not going to take it. Sorry. And you can still have PV all over your roof, and you can still have your own battery, but we're not going to take it. The other thing that occurs to me, Mark, and I'm really interested in your thought about this, is could we be in this kind of huge lull, waiting for Godot, waiting for word on LNG? I guess our conversation began at this point, didn't it? Are we just waiting for that, and then all this becomes somehow moot because the price of electricity goes down so much?
Well, I have a hard time believing that there's going to be, with substantially more natural gas coming into the state, that it would dramatically affect the price of electricity across the state in terms of dramatically push it down. I mean, I'm not an economist. I haven't played with the equations that would allow one to do some prognosticating, but I just find it hard to believe that would be a means to be able to significantly reduce the cost of electricity that island residents pay. I just don't see how we get there from here because it's still going to be an imported fossil fuel that's coming at substantial distance. So, just to briefly go back to the storage question, Jay, I think it's no doubt in my mind that it's going to involve more storage on both sides of the meter. It'll be on a smaller scale, of course, in people's individual homes and businesses, and on the customer side of the meter, and then on the utility side of the meter, which they're already going to be playing with a 3 megawatt battery bank that HNEI and MECO are doing on the island of Molokai. The utilities will go further and further in developing utility scale storage to be able to mitigate against winds that start and stop and suns that play peekaboo behind the clouds.
Yeah,
so it's going to happen on both sides of the meter.
Maybe that'll be the logical conclusion of all this motion practice in the PUC. That the utility will have to find a way to build more storage and thus accept more power. But before we go, we only have a minute left, really. Before we go, I just wanted to get your take on how, if at all, Dick Rosenblum's statement of intention to resign either reflects this or affects this. Where does that, is that just a personal decision, or is there a greater implication?
Well, I honestly can't claim to know Dick Rosenblum's inner motivations to make the decision that he did, but on the surface of it, I mean, 5 years as CEO of HECO, that's quite a long time when you consider the amount of action that he's seen, the amount of turbulence that the company has been experiencing. So I see his leaving and the inevitable passing of the baton is a pretty big deal, because at no time in HECO's recent history has the company been in such a state of being rocked, essentially, as in being buffeted by an increasingly almost strident Public Utilities Commission. You've got impatient lawmakers, and not just a few unhappy ratepayers who are really calling for some fundamental systemic changes there. So I think HECO will most likely do both an internal search and look at their 4 or 5 most likely candidates from inside the company, and they'll also look outside. And it'll be very interesting to see who they ultimately choose, and whether there's kind of this bias, I think, in Hawaii, that when you've got the need for a CEO or some high level executive to be replaced, that there's a clamor for, well, we should do all that we can so that the person is coming from the state and be a local guy or gal rather than look to the mainland. And it'd be interesting to see whether HECO is going to feel much of that pressure in terms of engaging a headhunter firm to the tune of 10,000, 20,000, however many tens of thousands of dollars to do a nationwide search. Now, I don't know whether they'll do that or not. I certainly think that they've got a number of top-level execs who certainly could fill the next CEO position, but that's certainly not my call. But I think the challenge is going to be substantial, and I mean, who would really want to step into the breach of taking on all the challenges that HECO is going to be dealing with, not just now but in the future? And I think that person has to have a very progressive vision of where the company should go in this brave new world of saturated circuits, and he or she has to have a thick skin of pretty much an armadillo to be able to deal with the inevitable arrows that are going to be fired in that person's direction, and have the genuine smile of a person who relishes that opportunity to try and almost do the impossible. And it'll be interesting to see that process unfolding and see who that next person is.
Well, let's keep on comparing notes, Marco. It's Marco Mangelsdorf, joins us from Santa Cruz, California, where he's teaching a course in politics and energy, just as he does in Hilo. He's with Provision Solar in Hilo, and we always enjoy having him on the show. Thank you so much, Marco.
Jay, truly always a special evening and afternoon that I can look forward to talking to you. So thank you again so much.
Aloha.